for now, we are going to focus on a new book called Straight Flossin and Other Stories of the American West. It was written by Danny Nielsen, who's here in the big Willie hat. And I'm so pleased. It's really such a treat for me. He's going to be interviewed by David Carle, who's one of my favorite people at the festival. He's written tons of books. Well, here, I'll just do the formal introduction. Trying to, instead of making it up out of my own mind. So I'll start with Danny. Danny Nielsen spent his childhood exploring the woods of Alabama before moving to Utah in high school. Culture shock quickly wore off as he developed a love, perhaps an addiction, for sweeping desert vistas and mountain skylines. He has spent the last decade traveling the American West for research and pleasure, studying and writing about its flora and fauna, including the human characters that make their home here. Danny lives in Reno and is a PhD student at the University of Nevada, Reno. Straight Flossin and Other Stories of the American West is his first book, and I'm especially honored that he's here. My publishing company, Whistling Rabbit Press, has just started publishing books written by other people besides myself, and the third one of that type is Danny's. So it's a very big treat for me to have him here. Yeah, thank you. All right, back to David Carle here. He's the author of, oops, I'm sure this is out of date now. I was going to say 14, but it might be 16. Every year we have to count up. He's the author of 14 nonfiction books and 2 novels. And I think Debbie and I commented, still 2 novels? Oh, gotcha, right, 14 nonfiction, can't add. But Debbie and I were commenting on Facebook how much we have enjoyed David's fiction work. He's best known for nonfiction because of his expertise, but we've also really enjoyed his novels. He grew up in Orange County, California, received his bachelor's degree at UC Davis in wildlife and fisheries biology, and a master's degree from CSU Sacramento in recreation and parks administration. He was a ranger at California State Parks for 27 years, and he's an expert in water and fire issues in California. Please welcome David and Danny.
Testing.
Hello. Yeah.
We got it. So Danny was actually here last year. Towards the end of the day, some people who were here may not have been here to hear what you had to say. And at that time, you two were talking about the book in progress. And so I guess one place to start this. Well, first of all, let me just tell you, I very much enjoyed this. I find it to be it's not a really big, thick book. It's a collection of chapters or essays. Would you talk about them as essays, each one of those? Yeah. And it's also very well illustrated. I enjoyed the feel of this book and the look of the book. So I just want you to know that. And tell us, so Danny is, a little background, a little more. As a graduate student at UNR, he has been studying in the field focused on wood rats. Many people know them as pack rats. And so that takes him into field locations, primarily down in the Mojave Desert. I guess you would say kind of between Mojave and Lake Isabella, kind of out there in a very quiet area. So, and that time in the field is really the central things that gave you the inspiration to write these various topics, these various stories. Is that correct? Is it? How did all of this book come about in relation to your work?
Well, thanks. And before I answer that, I just want to thank you again, David, for sitting in on this discussion today, and thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me to the festival and working with me on this project. It's been great, and I've really enjoyed my time here in previous years and today. So this book is short, as he mentioned, and it came out of stories that I had been writing for several years, even a few before I started field work for my PhD, but doing field work for jobs previously. Even one of my former bosses is here. So they became stories sort of centered around this theme of working in the desert and sort of the complicated relationships that we have with wilderness and with other humans when we're in these spaces, and even what our own maybe footprint is on the environment, even as we're trying to understand something about it and maybe even protecting it. So I think those are sort of the themes. And so some of the stories I had written previously, others were stories that I really wanted to write, and this gave me the motivation to do so. Because there's just, being out in the field, there's weird people. The wildlife actually don't scare me as much as the people do a lot of times. So, but I really enjoyed it. And speaking on the illustrations, those my wife, Sunny, produced these amazing illustrations in the book that I think actually, if you were to buy it, buy it for those. The writing, you can pass your own judgment, but the illustrations are great.
Well, let me, for those of you who haven't seen the book, let me give you a taste of what each of these chapter titles is. They're interesting. The introductory one is A Beckoning on the Horizon. And then he goes to Keith's place. Keith is one of the characters in the desert that he wanted to write about. Fire in the Desert, Unknown Unknowns. I love that chapter, and maybe we can get you, Danny, to talk about Unknown Unknowns a little bit. Strange Stewards of the Desert, Finding Shade and Losing My Mind, What Remains in a Land of Diminishing Returns, Getting Skunked, Straight Flossin Along the Great Western Frontier, and A Small Recycling Operation. I want to have Danny talk about this title. It may puzzle you. It certainly puzzled me, but we'll work towards that and kind of see if the answer maybe emerges from what we have to say or Danny has to say in these various chapters. So just reviewing those titles, and some of them are, they're about. I should say this, there in some of these essays you talk about essentially people being mad, or the madness of people who hang out for a long time in these arid, harsh, difficult environments. Talk about that. And why was that a theme for some of the topics?
I think some of my first real deep experiences in the desert were about a dozen years ago. I spent time in southern Nevada around Mesquite doing field work. And I think in my memory, one of the things that has really stuck with me was seeing giant groups of people that just sort of live in their RVs, campers out in the desert, even in the middle of summer. These leathery bodies that are just flags posted outside of their RV, and they're living life. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's partly because in some ways, to the unaided eye, the desert seems like a blank canvas to a lot of people, I think. There's a lot in the desert. It's a very rich place. But I don't know, maybe just the human activities on that landscape are a little more conspicuous in that manner. But I think the heat, the wind, the sun, it's hard to know, does that sculpt the strange people and behaviors, or do strange people with strange behaviors move into these places on purpose? Maybe it's a chicken or the egg thing, but I just find it to be thrilling to observe I could spend a lifetime circling around the desert. Just,
So a lot of this is about people and your experiences, but also the people that you've experienced. As a biologist, I'm very interested. We don't want to turn this into a scientific, talk about your PhD work necessarily, but wood rats and the place you ended up going in order to study them by putting out traps and studying these populations. How did that come about, and how does that tie in with these essays?
So I've spent a lot of my field work in Kelso Valley, which is, as you said, it's sort of, you could imagine a line between Bakersfield and Ridgecrest, north of Mojave, south of Lake Isabella. There's this awesome valley out there. The cell phones don't work. You don't see very many people. And it's what's unique about this location is that it's an ecotone, so it's this gradient that transitions from Mojave Desert into what's there, the very southern end of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And so the wood rats that live there are two species that hybridize. So we're really interested in really what they eat, how they eat, their diets here. They eat plants that are somewhat quite toxic. So we're interested in how they're able to consume these toxic plants, survive, and then how this hybridization between the two species may be influencing that. So I spent a lot of time in that area, and then I've spent time north, closer to Lake Isabella, and south, farther into the desert. And every trip down is a new adventure.
Which is, what it's all about. And we're talking about field research, and I've been lucky enough to, in working around Mona Lake now for 40 years, to run into and deal with and work with and learn to admire a lot of different field researchers who do different aspects of their research. And it's hard, right? I mean, do you want to talk about that? You write about it. Some of the essays deal with your thought process that led you into grad school and how you were going to work your way through grad school and why, and some talking to other grad students about what was really happening. But one thing I remember that you wrote about was about really physically, just how much people don't get about how many hours of a day and how much physical work may be involved in these kinds of things, and that's part of it. So I don't know if there's a question here, except that to comment on that, and I guess I'd like to at this point a check-in about how's it going with grad school too. So where are you on that now? In reading this. You write about the beginnings kind of that. You're in the middle of it in these, and I think things have probably moved along. So let me ask it first this way. Are you still doing all the field work, or have you moved to a different phase of that?
Yeah, no, I have not, other than luck, like little opportune moments where I get asked to help in the field for a day or two. But the work that I was doing for my PhD is done in the field. I'm actually preparing to defend in the beginning of September, so I will be done, which is exciting. Thank you.
What about the work? I mean, so in a minute, I hope maybe you'll read some from one of these. One of the chapters deals with fire in the desert, and one of the threats not only was the fire overwhelming the area where you were, but you had trap lines out, and before you could evacuate, you had to deal with the fact that you had potentially a lot of animals trapped in these traps that you didn't want to leave there to cook, But so at night you had to scramble to deal with all that. Over rough terrain and all of those things. Just talk about the physical part of this work.
Yeah, it's really physical, and that particular night we luckily got out in time, and we had to close these traps. I mean, we left them in the field, but we closed them in a way that animals couldn't go inside of them. But so I think the physical labor of it, it's remote. Just getting a trip down there takes a lot of coordinating with people, getting out, hauling traps all over the landscape, remembering where they are, sometimes. Challenging. And two, I think, as much as I love being out in these places, you spend a lot of time alone or with very few people, and, it's like I can't, I have a family back home, I worry about them, there's kind of a loneliness too that can creep in, especially the nature of the work we would do is a lot of nighttime trapping, so we're up all night, and then we try to sleep in the day, which is, you can imagine, is hard in the desert, it's hot, so you often spend a lot of time laying in your own pool of sweat, thinking about things and worrying about what's going on out in the world. And then on that lack of sleep, repeating that each night. So I think that's a lot of deep, introspection happens then, but a lot of, kind of lonely hours spent, mulling over things. So for me, it's I enjoy it, but it's almost like a type 2 fun sometimes. In the moment, I'm like, this is kind of miserable. What was I doing? But afterward, I could maybe write a story about this or think fondly about it.
So I want to get to your writing, your approach to the writing, and how the writing happens. But we talked about you reading some. You want to pick out something to read to us, give you a taste of how these things are presented.
Yeah, I was going to read a short, or hopefully short, but a piece of a story. This is the getting skunked story here, so it's just a part of it. If you want to know how it ended, you'll have to read the book yourself. All right.
Clever.
So, all right, here we are.
Available on the table back there.
19 of 20, nothing yet, I thought. The last pair of traps was placed under a large boulder beneath an oak tree. I clambered up the hill and ducked under branches, avoiding poison oak along the way. As I approached a trap near the opening to a small cave at the base of the boulder, I began to recoil instinctively. At first, unsure why, then horribly sure. Holy shit, it's a skunk. I winced. White and black glossy hair protruded from the wire sides of the fully closed trap. It pierced my soul with its blank gaze. Why, God damn you! I reached my arms up to the sky like a prophet and cried out, much more softly than I wanted to, as to not agitate the ungodly hell beast. I had been spoiled by the relative simplicity of rat trapping in my arid desert sites where skunks are rare. Jesus Christ, what should I do? I thought miserably to myself. I'll just go back to the truck. Yeah, I have that bottle of whiskey. I'll just go back and drink some whiskey. No, you asshat. It's barely 8 in the morning. Think. I stood quietly, now locked in a staring contest with the trapped skunk. After a moment, I realized I didn't smell the skunk, which meant it hadn't covered everything within 15 feet with its foul stench. Yet. I watched it a little longer. It appeared angry, but stable. I thought some more and began to construct a kind of plan as I backed slowly away and walked to my truck. I groped through a plastic bin of supplies and found a roll of 13-gallon trash bags. I took one and slowly walked back to the unwanted prisoner. I remembered a discussion with administrators at my university about what I would do if I captured a skunk, as if I should have a formal standard operating procedure in place for such an unlikely event. What the hell would I do? Didn't know, didn't care. It had seemed pretty speculative at the time. Well, now I guess I would find out. I wasn't sure exactly what I would do, but half-baked ideas are common when doing field work. The natural world doesn't provide the predictability that modern living has imposed on humanity. Holding the trash bag, I stood staring at the skunk. It noticed me. It seemed angry, but still no spray. I found 2 sticks, each about 2 feet long, and used them to hold the trash bag out in front of me, providing a barrier between me and the ticking stink bomb. Moving slowly and with the focus of a bomb squad technician, I placed the bag over the trap. Now I at least had a thin layer of protection, which might also help calm the skunk. Well, I still have a skunk in a trap. What now? I thought. I had to open the trap door to let the skunk out, but it was standing on the mechanism that triggered the door to shut. I could open the door, but would have to physically hold it open until the skunk walked out. No way in hell was I going to sit mere inches away from the ass end of a skunk and take a blast to the face. I backed away to a safe distance and pondered the situation. Still no smell, so I knew I hadn't lost the battle yet. I found another small stick, maybe 6 inches long, and thick enough to have some structural integrity. I slowly edged back over to the trap, acutely aware of the skunk within, and kneeled. I slowly inched the trap door open with one hand and grasped the stick with the other. Sweat began beading on my forehead as flies buzzed overhead. I held my breath. Furtively, but without hesitation, I placed one end of the stick under the trap door and angled the other end into the moist soil. The stick was just long enough to hold the door open all the way, and just strong enough to keep it that way. I slowly scooted away to a safe distance and watched for a moment to see if the crackpot apparatus would stay put. When no collapse and ensuing stink Armageddon seemed imminent, I let out a deep breath and walked back to the truck.
Jeff, how much time have we got?
This should take maybe 4 more minutes.
4 minutes. Well, I'd like to switch over to a little bit about writing then. Maybe you could tell us briefly how you found time, how you structured your time in order to produce this kind of writing. Do you do a journal, or do you just, how does that come about while you're doing grad school? But then the other thing is, where are you going next? And I think we'd be interested to hear that. And are you interested in writing fiction, for example? But first, just tell us about how you produced these essays.
Yeah, it was kind of, I'm in grad school doing science, so I do a lot of writing, very technical writing a lot, which is kind of boring at times, believe it or not. I mean, it's fun, but it's also, it's no creative nonfiction. So some of these stories I wrote, I didn't have a very structured process. A lot of it was kind of helping me process events after they had occurred, so it's sort of a way of journaling. Although I'm not a very rigorous journaler, it's hit or miss. But I think that's how a lot of this writing was done, was kind of after experiences, wanting to write them down, wanting to share them with others, but also have them for myself, later in life, and kind of reflect on, what the hell I was doing when I was this age. So that was kind of my process. And in terms of future writing, I would like to write more. I've actually got some ideas for maybe a novel, but I'm working on finishing school and some other things first. But yeah, I think that I would enjoy to keep writing and see where it takes me.
You got to carve out that time. I'm the voice of experience here. If you can't let everything else. If you want to do the writing, you got to carve some time for it. That's the deal. You worked with Jennifer. So you found a publisher. You want to talk about right in front of Jennifer, what it was like to get your book published?
Well, yeah, it was exciting. When I first had the idea, it was more or less to have a little thing to share with friends, and so I had considered just going to Kinko's and printing off some pamphlets to hand out. But then I found, I was just Googling, a few years ago, and I found a website for Whistling Rabbit Press, and it seemed like Jennifer's interests were kind of in line with some of the writing I had done at the time and that I was working on. And so I reached out to her, and she was very interested in kind of my pitch. And so I sent her, I think, one story at first. She liked that, and so I sent her more, and she liked that. And then it was a couple years process after that to bring this book to reality. But it was a learning experience. There's aspects of writing that take a lot longer than I think anyone realizes when they get into it. But I tried to enjoy the process as much as I could along the way and not let the sort of destination get too much of me.
So I promised we would get to the title. Straight Flossin totally threw me. Flossin, tell us, what about the title?
Yeah, well, so I think there's a dance that everybody probably knows about that came out several years ago. My experience with this term came from a friend. I grew up in Alabama, so I have this family friends that I grew up with. I've known them since kindergarten. And my friend Lenny, his older brother Cody, is sort of a southern redneck hippie deadhead sort of type of person. Interesting. And he's had run-ins with the law and in and out of trouble. But there were several years ago, maybe a decade now, I was talking with him on the phone and just chatting, how you doing, what's up? And he said, oh, I'm straight flossing home from Birmingham. And I thought, oh, that's a cool way to say you're driving someplace, And the reason why I kind of immediately enjoyed it too was that I knew that Cody, being who he is, was probably driving some beat-up ass clunker that was about ready for the junkyard. And he was headed home, but he didn't really care when or how exactly he got there. He was just enjoying the ride along the way. So it kind of became just a goofy way to describe driving somewhere, but maybe as a mental health thing for grad school, it sort of gave me a theme to live by to survive all the stress of it. Don't let the end point make you too stressed out. Just try to enjoy the moment you're in and learn a little bit along the way. Keep your mind open for that.
Okay, Straight Flossin by Danny Nielsen. Books are available today, and I'm sure they're available other places. So, thank you, Danny.
Thank you, David. Thank you.